Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How are you guys? We're back again to talk about X-Wing 2nd Edition because apparently I'm completely incapable of talking about anything else. Because the other day we had all of the content for both the Scum conversion kits and the Empire conversion kit spoiled, which included this card here. Genius. And this took me by surprise. Given everything we know that's going on with bombs in 2nd edition, it seems like FFG are really trying to wind back the power level, and that's mainly to do with timing with the system phase and all that kind of stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is something I was not expecting. I thought Genius was something that FFG definitely didn't want to play around with in 2nd edition, and it really got me thinking, which is why the other day when we were talking about all the unique Scum crew, I said I'd make a separate video. This is that video. So before we talk about anything else, let's take a look at this new version of Genius. He is a Scum-only astromech. After you fully execute a maneuver, if you have not dropped or launched a device this round, you may drop one bomb. And bombs are specifically cards that reflect bombs from 1st edition, being that they're not proxy mined, or basically anything with mine in the title. A bomb is something that you would drop during the system phase, and it would go off at the end of the activation phase. In 1st edition, it was something that your ship would drop before it executed its maneuver, and again would go off at the end of the activation phase. And this pretty much reflects what Genius currently does in 1st edition post-nerf. After you reveal and execute a maneuver, if you did not overlap a ship, you may discard one of your equipped bomb upgrade cards without the action header, then drop the corresponding bomb token. And functionally, this is exactly what's going on with Genius in 2nd edition, except it interacts differently with the bomblet generator. If you have the bomblet generator in 1st edition, you must discard it. Usually it doesn't discard, you just get to use it over and over again, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. In 2nd edition, you do get that recursion with the bomblet generator. It's just the bomblet generator isn't as infinite as it once was. You have to spend shields in order to recharge it, which makes perfect sense. And the key thing that Genius does here is he plays around with initiative. In terms of what happens in 2nd edition with all the bombs going on, you drop it during the system phase and they either go off when an enemy ship collides with it, in the case of mines, or it goes off the end of activation phase. And you don't get a lot of agency over the timing of that. You rarely get to see what your opponent's dial is unless you have an informant and your opponent has a lower initiative, or you have Genius and you get to drop it during the activation phase, interacting with your initiative. And this is the key thing I wanted to talk about with Genius, because he's currently the only card in 2nd edition, apart from kind of the informant. But in terms of timing with dropping your own bombs, Genius is the only card that allows you to interact with your initiative, which is what got me concerned initially. And it's why I want to sort of compare everything that's going on and have a quick chat about it. Now, before we go on with everything, no, I don't think Genius is going to break 2nd edition. I just want to say that right off the bat here. I'm not making this video to go, oh, FFG, you've ruined everything. I think everything's fine. Once I kind of thought through everything, I realized, you know what, I think this is okay. It kind of borrows some of the playstyle from 1st edition, but not really in any really pushed or broken way. Before we continue, let's have a look at all the cards that we had that really pushed bombing in 1st edition. And yes, I know that there are some other pilots and upgrades and stuff like that, but these were the key ingredients that really made bombing oppressive. Sabine Red and Cad Bane in 1st edition added a bomb slot, which gave several ships agency to do things like take the bomblet generator or just get more bomb slots in general. And that proved problematic. On the Rebel faction, Sabine did not give any ships the ability to take the bomblet generator that could not already do it. But she was still very oppressive alongside the bomblet generator. A lot of damage came from just 2 dice taking all the hits and crits from that, and then 1 more hit on top of that with Sabine. A very powerful card. And Cad Bane in 1st edition actually gives some Scum ships the agency to take the bomblet generator that otherwise couldn't. We're talking about fire sprays that don't have the Andrasa title or the quad jumper. And the quad jumper is an interesting case, but I don't think it's anything meta-defining. It's a bit of fun, but the key thing here with these 2 cards is they no longer give you the bomb slot in 2nd edition. Now, moving on to the Trajectory Simulator and Genius. These 2 cards were very problematic in 1st edition. And FFG have really curtailed these 2 and made sure they don't interact together, which is super important. The Trajectory Simulator still gives you a bit of options, but the key thing is with the Trajectory Simulator, because you're not dropping bombs when your ship activates during the activation phase, you get no more information. So yes, you get more choices about where you think your opponent's going to be. You can drop a bomb in front of you or behind you, but it doesn't doesn't offer you the same kind of guarantees that it did in first edition. Bombardier is something I want to put on this list, not because it was powerful in first edition, it clearly wasn't, it never really saw any meta play, but it's interesting because it's getting a bit of a push in second edition. And extra munitions, of course, up the amount of times you could drop most bombs that weren't the bomblet generator. In the case of Genius having to discard the bomblet generator, it actually gave you a free discard, so that was also quite powerful. But it was something that was problematic on munitions overall, because again, it's something you have to take into account when designing ships. Can you give this ship the torpedo slot? Is it okay if a ship can get discounted copies of extra munitions? That's an important thing to think about. And Captain Nim, in first edition, was on the Rebel faction, and this version of Nim allowed you to prevent a friendly bomb from going off once per turn. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second, but that was not really, in terms of design, a huge problem. It's very, very good for versatility with bombing, and when bombing is already super oppressive in first edition, it just pushes the power level of that significantly more. Now, Captain Nim on the Scum faction, despite not seeing as much meta play overall, I firmly believe is more problematic design-wise, and particularly when we look at things like Bomblet Generator and Genius, that first sentence, "You may ignore friendly bombs." In fact, if you guys have been watching this channel for over a year now, you'll know that when this was announced, I was so hyped for that first sentence. And I was pretty much right in terms of guessing that that's going to be very, very powerful. Ignoring friendly bombs means you can take Genius, drop a bomb after you move, and then you have the ability to bomb your opponent while completely blanking out on your own damage, which is really, really good. Genius originally was a card that could only be taken on Y-Wings and only offered you downside in order to get that versatility. Now, it's good if you can move and you happen to, hit your opponent's ship and then you bomb them. Maybe that actually is worth bombing your own ship because you're hitting a high priority target, like say a TIE Interceptor or something like that. But it came with a lot of inbuilt risk, which Captain Nim on the Scum faction just completely blanked out. And from day dot, that was problematic. If you guys ever saw that in tournaments where Nim would just bump, bomb, bump, bomb, bump, bomb, like really high priority ships, all whilst having a TLT that he could still shoot because you didn't have to move the arc and all that kind of stuff. Very, very powerful stuff. I don't think I need to impress upon you guys how powerful bombing was in first edition. Let's move on to all the elements that we're seeing in second edition, which kind of fill all these same roles. And again, starting with Sabine Wren and Cad Bane, both of these guys give you a bit of versatility when it comes with bombing, kind of like an extra payoff for bombing, but they don't give your ship another bomb slot, and they don't really have a lot of super powerful things. They don't actually make bombs strictly better. Sabine Wren allows you to add to the effects of a bomb like she used to, but she's only adding one of these control tokens, either an ion, a jam, or a stress. And situationally, each of these can be completely useless. Usually, if you're going to choose which one of these is going to occur, yes, you're going to choose the most powerful one, and it should always have some relevance on the game state. I think we can all agree this is not as powerful as just giving free damage. Damage is the thing that sort of gets you closer to winning. Control things are ways of getting your ships in better positions, which get you closer to damaging, which gets you closer to winning, but it's a few extra steps. It's more about choices. You still have to fly to make this work. There can be situations where all three of these are completely useless and you're going to sort of be spitting chips that you have Sabine. Cad Bane allows you to take a free red boost when you launch any kind of device, which I think is really, really powerful, but it doesn't give your bombs any kind of extra bonus. He doesn't give you the rerolls that he used to, doesn't give you an extra bomb slot, and I think as a utility bomber, this is going to be fantastic. Whether this fits on the Skurg bomber, to be honest, I think this is more likely to have a home on the Fire Spray, but the Fire Spray already has a lot of really cool options. So I'm not sure what Cad Bane's going to do, but clearly it's not about just offering more ships to the Bomblet Generator. It's not about making bombs more consistent, which I think is a good thing. And again, if we have a look at the Trajectory Simulator and Genius combo now, the Trajectory Simulator now specifically says during the system phase, does all the same stuff it used to. You get to launch the bomb forward with the 5 straight, but specifically not interacting with Genius and specifically acting before any of your opponent's ships fly makes this much less powerful. I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, oh, Trajectory Simulator, it's a huge problem. Why would they reprint it? Really, the timing of everything going on here is what's going to keep it at bay, and I'm pretty happy to see that it's been included. I think if bombs are still going to be relevant, we need the versatility so long as you don't get too much information when you're bombing. I think that's the key thing which tends to break it. Now, Skilled Bombardier, replacing the original Bombardier, is a gunner card. If you would drop or launch a device, you may use a template of the same bearing with a speed 1 higher or lower. And I think this card is actually really worth looking at, particularly with the pilots Eamon Azameen and Sol Sigza. Now, Eamon Azameen, it's a bit problematic because you would have to take the Marauder title in order to have Skilled Bombardier, which means you don't have the Andraste title and you can't reload your bombs. So maybe that's a bit of a nombo, but definitely worth talking about. However, with Sol Sigza, it is worth mentioning. Now, we don't know if the Skirg Bomber is going to get the gunner slot. It's definitely something we basically have to look at immediately if that does happen. I'm going to guess, based on the presence of this card, that Sol Sigza and the Skirg Bomber in general will not get the gunner slot. I think Skilled Bombardier is actually a way of giving the K-Wing a bit more utility. So the K-Wing can take like a veteran turret gunner or something to make its turrets more powerful, but it can also take Skilled Bombardier and get a little bit more versatility out of bombing. And that's good because the K-Wing kind of pales in comparison to the bombing capabilities of the Skirg Bomber. Indeed, when the Alpha Class Starwing came out, it kind of made that new version of Advanced Slam really favour the Alpha Class Starwing in terms of a ship that can slam better. So the Skirg Bomber and the Alpha Class Starwing were basically beating out the K-Wing with its best tricks, despite it seeing meta play because, of course, Miranda Doney was so pushed, which is no longer the case. And one more thing I want to talk about on this spread, Captain Nim. Before a friendly bomber mine would detonate, you may spend 1 charge. He has 1 charge that does recur to prevent it from detonating. So the same ability as Rebel Captain Nim from 1st edition. While you defend against an attack obstructed by a bomber mine, roll 1 additional defense die. So we're kind of getting a bit of a blend between Rebel Nim and Scum Nim, which seems really good because Rebel Nim was already pretty powerful. And getting that little bit of extra upside of the second sentence that was in the Scum Nim ability, I think it's okay. I think we can all agree out of all the 3 abilities that the old Nims had, that was the worst. Getting extra evade tokens was pretty cool. Again, we're not just adding an evade result because nothing in 2nd edition does that. Well, almost nothing does that, apart from like Nora Wexley. It's the more balanced version of what it does. And I think ultimately, looking at this, it's not going to really tilt people into wanting to scatter the field with bombs. I just think this is going to be a nice upside when it does happen, but it's not something you're really going to try and aim for. And ultimately, despite the fact that the Rebel version of Nim's ability, which is now the first sentence of the only Nim, which is the Scum Nim, in 2nd edition, is very powerful, I don't think this is a problem. I actually think the first sentence of the old Scum Nim was more problematic because it played around with the advantages you can gain from really oppressive bomb strategies where bombing after you drop a bomb with Genius. I think this is the key thing. There's no just dope combo with Genius anymore, which brings Genius back to being sort of the high risk, high reward card he always was. I don't think that means Genius is useless. I still assert that there will be some situations where you're happy to let Nim just take a bomb blast in order to hit your opponent's ace, or maybe like a swarm of TIE fighters. We know swarms are still going to be a thing. You still have to execute a maneuver against swarms though, so that might be difficult. Yeah, there's a lot of factors to think about, but I think ultimately Genius is not the biggest problem he once was. And to really illustrate this point, I want to actually show you guys on the table the big differences between what's going on with 1st edition and 2nd edition Captain Nim. So for example, we have a scenario here in 1st edition where all the dials have been set and we begin the activation phase. Which means that in this example, Kyle Katarn and Halton Salm will have to fly first, giving Captain Nim a lot of information about how best to use his bombs. Kyle Katarn, for example, does a slight bank in front of Captain Nim, and Halton Salm does a 1 forward. This means that when we move on to Captain Nim's activation, he has a lot of choices here. Despite the fact that he can't use Genius after he bumps into Kyle Katarn from doing a 3 forward, he can still use the trajectory simulator, bomb Kyle Katarn, and then he has the option of not taking the damage. Conversely, as we see here, he can use the bomblet generator straight away, hit Halton Salm, and then continue to bump into Kyle Katarn. Also in first edition, we don't have to deal with moving the turret arc. This means that his TLT can still be used on Horton Solm without having to take the action from bumping into Kyle Katarn. A lot of versatility and a lot of damage he's still able to offer despite the fact that he still bumped into Kyle Katarn. We then move on to detonating that bomb generator. The rebel player rolls 2 dice and gets a hit and a crit. Not a good time for Horton Solm in the least. Moving on to a scenario in 2nd edition, we start off with the system phase before any one of these 3 ships has to fly. The Captain Nim player has a bit of a choice to make here. He can drop a bomb generator right now, or he can wait to activate Genius during the activation phase, but that all depends on him not getting bumped, so we have to sort of try and guess as best as we can what to do. He has elected in this scenario to drop the bomblet first. And this means when we go on to activating, the player using Kyle Katarn and Horton Solm have enough information to try and avoid that bomb as best they can. Kyle Katarn does his 1 bank, and Horton Solm does his 1 forward. Thanks to the Y-Wing having a red barrel roll in 2nd edition, he can then avoid the bomb. And you can see here how by adding in the system phase, the player on the receiving end of bombs gets a lot more agency to kind of use the information to get around them. Now the bombing player can get around this by carefully planning out how they bomb and backing the other player into a corner where they cannot avoid it, but you can clearly see how a dire situation in 1st edition is no longer a big problem for the player on the receiving end of bombs. Also, Captain Nim now bumps into Kyle Katarn because he would need to move his firing arc in order to fire his turret. Unless he already had it facing backwards, he's not going to be able to hit Horton Solm during the attack phase. Let's take a look at one more scenario in 2nd edition where Genius comes into play. Let's say, for example, the Hawk is piloted by Jan Ors, and now Captain Nim is the first player and must fly first. When Captain Nim comes to activate, assuming he did not drop a bomb during the system phase, he can then drop a bomb with Genius. And right now, he doesn't have a lot of information, so he's hoping, in this scenario, Jan Ors is going to fly into him. Now, he assumed correctly in the scenario, but because he has no agency to ignore that bomb, if Jan Ors bumps into him, he must make the choice. Does he let the bomb go off and damage Jan Ors in exchange for bombing himself, or does he hold it in situ and hope that Jan Ors or Horton Solm flies near it next turn, despite the fact that his opponent has full knowledge of where that bomb is? He could use it as map control, but it's safe to say that that's a lot less oppressive. We then move on to the activation of Horton Solm, and because he no longer has to use that red barrel roll, he can now use that action to rotate his turret and face Captain Nim. Again, it doesn't matter what situation Captain Nim chooses to do, his opponent has agency to play around it and still get value out of their ships. Anyway guys, I hope this video goes some ways to explaining why I'm not too concerned about Genius. I think the card inclusion is okay. Still a bit of a surprise that he's in the game, but I don't think he's going to be breaking anything. In the meantime guys, thank you so much for watching. Still a lot of X-Wing 2nd edition content for me to make. Like and subscribe, like me on Facebook, Twitter and Reddit, and I will catch you guys later.